6 feet, that's all my neighbor stole from me, just 6 feet of land. But those 6 feet nearly destroyed my peace, my family's happiness, and in the end, they cost him his mansion. My name is David Miller, and I never imagined my quiet suburban life would turn into a war over something as simple as a fence. I loved my backyard. It wasn't just a patch of grass. It was where my kids played soccer until the sun went down, where my wife Rachel and I hosted family barbecues, where I found peace after long days at work. Every inch of that yard meant something to me. But one spring morning, I stepped outside and froze. A brand new wooden fence was standing where it didn't belong, not on the property line, 6 feet inside my yard. At first, I thought maybe the contractors made a mistake. It happens. But then I saw Mark Weston, my neighbor, standing on his balcony, sipping his morning whiskey with that smug look plastered on his face. I called up to him, "Mark, that fence, it's on my property. It needs to be moved back." He smirked and leaned against the railing like he was king of the neighborhood. "Relax, David, it's just a few feet. Your grass looks the same either way. Nobody's going to care. Be smart, drop it." "Drop it? No way." I clenched my jaw. "It's my land, move it back." Mark chuckled, his voice dripping with arrogance. "David, I've got the bigger house, the bigger yard, the better everything. Nobody's going to back you up over 6 feet. Trust me, you'll lose." Backhand index pointing right. Before I take you deeper into this, make sure you subscribe to Darkside Revenge, because this story is proof that arrogance always destroys itself. That night, I told Rachel what happened. She wasn't surprised. Mark had always been arrogant, throwing parties that shook the whole block, parking his luxury cars halfway on other people's lawns, acting like rules didn't apply to him. Rachel put her hand on mine and said, "Don't let him get away with this. That's our yard, that's where the kids play." And I promised her I won't. If he wants a war, he'll regret starting it. The next morning, I made a call to Kevin, one of my old college friends. Kevin was a licensed land surveyor. When I explained what happened, he didn't hesitate. 6 feet? That's not an accident, David, that's theft. I'll come measure it myself." When Kevin arrived, he set up his tripod and measuring tools in my backyard. Mark, of course, came out to watch, grinning from his balcony. "What's this, David? Think a couple sticks in the ground will change reality." Kevin didn't even look up. "Reality doesn't bend, Mr. Weston, it's measured." Hours passed as Kevin worked carefully, recording every number, every angle. When he finally finished, he turned to me with a grim expression. "David, he stole 6 feet, and it wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. And because of this, his mansion is now in violation of zoning laws. This isn't just trespassing. This could mean fines, lawsuits, even demolition." Demolition, that single word sent a chill down my spine, but also a flicker of hope. That evening, I walked back into my yard and looked up at Mark. He was lounging in a chair, acting like nothing mattered. I called out, "Funny thing about the law, Mark, it doesn't care about your mansion or your whiskey. It only cares about the line, and you crossed it." For the first time, his smirk faltered. I knew then this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that fence jutting into my backyard, mocking me. 6 feet of stolen land, 6 feet that Mark Weston thought he could claim without consequences. But I was done standing by. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Helen. I explained the situation and sent her pictures of the fence and Kevin's survey measurements. Helen didn't even flinch. "David, this isn't just a property dispute. This is blatant theft. And trust me, the law doesn't take kindly to people who move fences for fun. We can put a stop to him, and he might even owe damages." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone with authority validating what I already knew. Mark Weston had crossed a line, literally and figuratively. Helen recommended a formal notice. She drafted a letter citing Kevin's survey, warning Mark to remove the fence immediately or face legal action. I signed it and asked her to send it first thing in the morning. Meanwhile, Mark didn't waste time. By noon, he was packing his balcony, phone in hand, probably calling his lawyer or more likely, bragging about how clever he was. He must have thought this would intimidate me. Later that afternoon, I decided to confront him personally. I walked up to the boundary, keeping my calm. Mark came down from his balcony with a fake grin. "So David, lawyer letters now, really?" he sneered. "What's next? You going to try and take my house too?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Mark, it's not a joke, that fence is on my property, you crossed the line, remove it." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You think sending letters or shouting from your yard is going to scare me? I've lived here 20 years, David. You're just the new guy who thinks rules apply to me." I clenched my fists, but I stayed calm. "Mark, rules aren't suggestions, they apply to everyone. You're breaking the law, and you're about to see what happens when arrogance meets reality." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He tried to cover it with a smirk, but I knew he was sweating. After that, I spent the next few days preparing. I gathered every document, every photograph, and every piece of evidence showing the exact boundary of my property. I also talked to neighbors who had seen his parties, his vehicles encroaching on other yards, and his general disregard for the rules. One evening, Rachel came to me. She could see the worry in my face. "David, you're planning something big, aren't you?" I nodded. "This isn't just about 6 feet, Rachel. This is about teaching him a lesson he'll never forget. I've spent my life following the rules. Maybe it's time someone else did too." And just like that, the plan began to take shape. I wouldn't just fight back, I'd make sure Mark Weston felt every consequence of his arrogance. The following morning, I got a call from Kevin, my surveyor friend. His tone was serious. "David, you won't believe what I found. Mark didn't just move the fence 6 feet, he violated setback rules for the whole property. If the city sees this, it could trigger fines, citations, and even orders to demolish parts of his mansion." I felt a surge of vindication. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore, this was leverage. I spent the day researching zoning laws, speaking with city officials discreetly, and making sure every document was in order. By evening, I had a folder packed with evidence: the survey, photographs, property records, and eyewitness statements from neighbors, every angle covered. That night, I couldn't resist peeking at Mark's balcony from my kitchen window. He was hosting one of his infamous parties, music blasting, lights flashing, expensive cocktails being passed around. He looked untouchable, but I knew better. I drafted an email to Helen, my lawyer. "It's time we escalate," I wrote. She responded immediately, "I'll file a complaint with the city planning office. With Kevin's survey, it's airtight. He's about to learn what happens when arrogance ignores boundaries, literally." The next morning, city inspectors arrived unannounced. Mark came rushing out, panicked. "What's going on here?" he shouted. "I didn't request this." I stayed in the background, watching. The inspectors measured, compared records, and shook their heads. One of them muttered, "Violation of setback by 6 feet, mansion partially on neighbor's property, legal action pending." Mark's face drained of color. He tried to talk his way out, gesturing wildly, but it was too late. Every document, every measurement worked against him. Later that day, Kevin called. "David, I've never seen someone so reckless. If they follow through, your neighbor's mansion could be partially demolished. And it's all because he couldn't respect property lines." I smirked. "That's 6 feet of land, Kevin, 6 feet of arrogance." By evening, the news had reached other neighbors. Suddenly, Mark's once glorious parties were quiet. People avoided him. He couldn't wave off fines or ignore the law anymore. His empire of entitlement was crumbling. Rachel sat with me on the porch. "You did all this for us?" she asked, pride and relief in her eyes. "No," I said, "I did this for truth, for fairness, and for him to finally understand that actions have consequences." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the next steps. Mark Weston's arrogance had blindsided him, but this battle wasn't over. The city would process the complaint and his mansion would be in jeopardy, but I wanted to make sure the lesson was unforgettable. I realized then that sometimes justice isn't about revenge, It's about exposing arrogance and letting it destroy itself. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mark Weston was on edge, packing his mansion like a caged tiger. The once confident man who sipped whiskey on his balcony now looked paranoid, constantly checking fences, cameras, and property lines as if the world itself had turned against him. I, on the other hand, stayed calm. Rachel and the kids kept busy in the backyard, completely unaware of the storm brewing next door. Every evening, I'd watch Mark through the window, seeing his frustration grow. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the law was finally catching up with him. I decided it was time to step up my game. I reached out to a local journalist I knew, someone who loved stories about arrogance and comeuppance. "I have a story you might want to cover," I told her. "It involves a neighbor, a 6-foot fence, and a mansion that's in violation of zoning codes." Within hours, she arrived, camera in hand, and asked me to explain everything. I recounted the story from the beginning: the fence, Mark's smug attitude, Kevin's survey, and the impending city fines. Her eyes widened. "This is gold," she said. "People will eat this up. You've basically handed me a live headline." I smirked. "Just make sure the focus is on the arrogance. That's what caused this mess in the first place." Backhand index pointing right. Before I take you deeper into this, make sure you subscribe to Darkside Revenge, because this story is proof that arrogance always destroys itself. The next morning, city inspectors returned with official notices citing Mark for multiple violations. He read them, hands shaking, face pale. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "I've got lawyers, I've got everything, this isn't real." Reality, unfortunately for him, had a way of catching up. The fines were hefty, the citations clear, and the threat of partial demolition hung over his head like a dark cloud. I didn't gloat aloud, there was no need. The law was doing all the talking. Neighbors started whispering. Mark's reputation, carefully built over decades of flashy parties and ostentatious displays of wealth, began to crumble. People stopped inviting him to block events, stopped making small talk. The mansion that once symbolized his power now symbolized his hubris. I spent the evening planning my next steps. Kevin had suggested monitoring every move Mark made, documenting each violation. "We need to make sure the city can't back down," he said. Rachel shook her head. "You've already done enough, he's scared, let it go." I smiled. "Not yet. He needs to understand what happens when arrogance goes unchecked. This isn't just about a fence anymore, it's about teaching a lesson no one forgets." Little did Mark know, the storm was only beginning, and the next few weeks would be the most satisfying chapter of all. Mark Weston's mansion, once the crown jewel of the neighborhood, was starting to feel like a prison. Every step he took outside, every glance at the fence, reminded him that he was cornered. I could see the panic in his eyes from my own yard, and truthfully, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The city had escalated things quickly. Notices piled up, inspectors came in unannounced, and each visit revealed new violations that Mark had thought would never be noticed. The mansion's foundations, the landscaping, even the supposedly extra garage were now under scrutiny. All of it traced back to the 6 feet he had stolen from my property. I began documenting everything meticulously: photographs, dates, official letters, video footage of Mark's behavior. Kevin, ever the professional, advised me to keep a precise record. "If this goes to court, you'll need every detail," he said. I nodded. This wasn't just about a fence anymore, it was about justice. Mark's arrogance was cracking under the pressure. He tried to rally his lawyer friends, his real estate connections, even the neighborhood association, but nothing could undo the reality Kevin had exposed. The line had been crossed, literally, and the law was on my side. One morning, I noticed Mark frantically measuring the distance between his fence and my property line again. He was muttering under his breath, clearly panicking. "David," he shouted across the yard, "this is ridiculous. Who do you think you are? You can't ruin me like this." I smiled and waved casually. "Ruining? Mark, the only thing I'm doing is letting the law speak. You did this to yourself." Inside, Rachel watched quietly, a small smile on her face. She knew I wasn't seeking vengeance for the sake of it. This was about principle, about respect, about teaching someone that arrogance and disregard for others have consequences. Days later, the journalist returned with a camera crew filming Mark as he tried to argue with city officials. The footage was priceless, Mark shouting, gesturing wildly, his mansion looming behind him like a symbol of his hubris. "This will go viral," the journalist whispered. It did. Social media lit up with posts about the mansion fence scandal, neighbors sharing videos discussing the arrogance of a man who thought 6 feet of stolen land would go unnoticed. Comments poured in, some cheering my stand, others marveling at Mark's audacity. And just when Mark thought things couldn't get worse, the city added another citation. His mansion's setback violations meant that portions of the property would need to be demolished if corrections weren't made immediately. Panic turned to terror in his eyes. I walked past the fence that now clearly marked the property line, feeling a sense of calm triumph. The fight was far from over, but Mark's power, the illusion of his untouchable mansion, had begun to crumble. And in that moment, I realized sometimes justice isn't about confrontation. It's about patience, persistence, and letting someone's own arrogance become their downfall. Mark was desperate now. Every day I could see him packing behind the windows of his mansion, muttering to himself, calling lawyers, and attempting to find loopholes that simply didn't exist. His smug confidence had evaporated, replaced with a frantic energy that made him almost unrecognizable. Kevin and I kept a close eye on every development. The surveyor's report had already done its work, but now the city inspectors were enforcing fines and warning of potential demolition. Mark had no idea that every action he took was being documented, every call he made was recorded, and every violation was being logged meticulously. One morning, I received a call from my lawyer. "David, they're escalating. The city is now threatening to revoke permits for the mansion entirely unless compliance is met, and based on Kevin's survey, the corrections required are significant. This is serious." I nodded, though there was a quiet satisfaction in my chest. This wasn't just about land anymore. Mark's arrogance had put him in a position where he couldn't fix the problem easily. Everything he had built, every lavish addition, every luxury item, it all hinged on that 6-foot stretch he had stolen. And now he was paying the price. Meanwhile, Rachel reminded me to stay calm. "Don't let this change who you are," she said. "We're not just fighting for ourselves. This is about sending a message, but also about keeping our peace." I smiled. She was right, of course. I didn't want revenge for the thrill of it. I wanted justice, and I wanted Mark to understand the consequences of arrogance. And then came the turning point. A city inspector arrived with an official notice stating that unless Mark took immediate corrective action, portions of his mansion were subject to removal. The shock was evident on his face, the panic undeniable. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, exposed, and utterly powerless. Neighbors began noticing the tension. Gossip spread quickly, as it always does. Mark's reputation, once one of dominance and superiority, was now tarnished. People whispered about the fence scandal, the legal actions, and the looming demolition. I watched quietly, letting him squirm under the weight of his own hubris. It was during one of these days, while Mark was on yet another frantic call with a lawyer, that I realized something important. Patience had been my greatest weapon. By documenting everything, staying calm, and letting the law take its course, I had turned his arrogance into his downfall without lifting a single finger to destroy him personally. And as I walked past the fence, looking out over my yard where my kids played soccer and Rachel tended the garden, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through persistence, careful planning, and letting someone's own ego trip them up. Backhand index pointing right. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to Darkside Revenge, because the ending is something you absolutely won't want to miss. Mark didn't realize it yet, but the 6 feet he stole from me had started a chain of events that would end with him losing everything he thought he could control. And by the time the story concluded, he would learn the hardest lesson of all: arrogance always destroys itself. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Mark's mansion, once the crown jewel of the block, now stood like a monument to his arrogance, a constant reminder that one man's ego could unravel everything he had built. Every morning, I watched him from my porch, packing nervously, staring at the fence that had caused all this chaos. Kevin had checked everything again. The city inspectors had confirmed that Mark's structure was in violation. Fines were accumulating daily, and without immediate corrective measures, parts of the mansion could be torn down. Every attempt Mark made to manipulate the situation, calling lawyers, bribing contractors, trying to negotiate behind closed doors, was falling apart. His arrogance had no room here. One afternoon, I received a message from a neighbor. "David, you won't believe this. Mark's mansion inspector just sent him a demolition notice for the parts encroaching on your property." I could feel a grin spreading across my face, but I kept my composure. This wasn't gloating. It was the justice I had patiently worked for, the law finally catching up with a man who thought he was untouchable. Rachel came out to the porch holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "Looks like justice has a way of catching up," she said, her eyes twinkling. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief and pride. The kids ran past us, laughing, completely unaware of the storm that had been brewing behind our fence. Mark finally confronted me one morning, his face pale, sweat trickling down his temple. "David, I don't understand. This can't be happening. How is this legal?" I walked over slowly, keeping my voice calm, measured. "Mark, reality doesn't bend to your will. You moved the fence, you encroached on my property, and you ignored the law. That 6 feet wasn't just land, it was your line, and you crossed it." His jaw tightened. I could see the panic, the fear, the realization that every shortcut, every arrogant move had led to this. "Please, I'll fix it. I'll move it back. I'll pay fines, just please, David." I shook my head. "It's too late for apologies. You had a choice and you made the wrong one. Now you face the consequences." By the end of that week, city crews arrived. Sections of the mansion that had been built over the property line were marked and demolition notices were posted. Mark's arrogance had led him to this point, and there was no turning back. I stepped back, watching quietly, my family by my side. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about letting the law and careful planning take care of someone who thought he could act above it. Arrogance, unchecked, destroys itself. And as the sun set, casting golden light over my yard, my kids played freely, Rachel smiled, and I finally felt the peace I had been protecting all along. Mark had learned his lesson the hard way. This story proves one thing: never underestimate the power of patience, justice, and standing your ground. Arrogance can build mansions, but it can also tear them down. Backhand index pointing right. If you want more stories where justice prevails and arrogance meets its end, make sure to subscribe to Darkside Revenge. You won't want to miss what's coming next.